Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you handed them the keys to your entire life, only to discover they were planning to throw you away like yesterday's newspaper? My name is Margaret, I'm 72 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core. 3 years ago, I thought I was the luckiest grandmother in Milwaukee. Today, I know I was the biggest fool. Before we begin this story, if you believe that family should mean something, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support means the world to me, and trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. I never thought I'd be living with my daughter at my age. When my Harold passed away 3 years ago after 48 years of marriage, I felt like half of my soul had been ripped away. We had built such a beautiful life together in our little house on Maple Street. Every corner held a memory, every piece of furniture told a story. Harold and I had collected antiques for decades. We had Depression-era glassware that his mother had passed down, Civil War memorabilia that we'd found at estate sales, and vintage jewelry that I'd inherited from my own grandmother. Our house wasn't just a home, it was a museum of our love story. But after Harold died, everything changed. The house felt too big, too empty, too quiet. I'd wake up in the middle of the night reaching for him, only to find cold sheets where his warmth used to be. My daughter Sarah would call me every day, sometimes twice a day, asking how I was doing. She'd say things like, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone in that big house. What if something happens to you? What if you fall and no one finds you for days?" At first, I thought she was just being caring. Sarah had always been my responsible child, the one who made good grades, who married a stable man, who gave me my precious grandson Tommy. She's 45 now, works as a secretary at a law firm downtown, and has always seemed to have her head on straight. Her husband Mike is 47, works in construction, and had always been polite to me, though we never had much in common. He's one of those men who watches sports all weekend and doesn't say much during family dinners. But Sarah kept insisting that I shouldn't live alone. "Mom," she'd say, "we have that extra room upstairs. Tommy would love to have his grandma closer. You could help me with cooking and housework, and we could take care of you. It makes perfect sense." When she put it like that, it did sound reasonable. I was getting older, my arthritis was getting worse, and the winters in Milwaukee were becoming harder for me to handle alone. The decision to move in with them wasn't easy. It meant selling my beautiful house, the house where Harold and I had raised our children, where we'd celebrated Christmas mornings and birthday parties and anniversaries. But Sarah assured me that all my belongings would be safe in their house. "We have plenty of storage space, Mom. Your antiques will be perfect in our living room. Tommy will love hearing the stories behind each piece." So I did it. I sold my house and moved in with Sarah, Mike, and 8-year-old Tommy. I have to admit, those first few months were actually wonderful. Tommy was absolutely delighted to have his grandma living with them. He'd run home from school every day and find me in the kitchen, where I'd have fresh cookies waiting for him. We'd sit at the kitchen table and he'd tell me about his day while eating chocolate chip cookies and drinking milk. Tommy is such a special little boy. He has these bright blue eyes that remind me so much of my Harold, and this curious nature that just melts my heart. He'd ask me endless questions about everything. "Grandma, why do birds fly south for winter? Grandma, how did you meet Grandpa? Grandma, why do some people have brown eyes and some people have blue eyes?" I loved every single question. After months of silence in my empty house, having a child's laughter fill the rooms again felt like a gift from heaven. I settled into a routine quickly. I'd wake up early, make breakfast for everyone, pack Tommy's lunch with little notes that made him smile, and then spend my days keeping the house tidy and preparing dinner. Sarah and Mike both worked full-time, so having me there to handle the household tasks seemed to work perfectly for everyone. I felt useful again, needed again. I wasn't just some old woman waiting to die, I was contributing to my family. My antiques found new homes throughout their house. My grandmother's china cabinet went in the dining room, displaying the beautiful dishes that had been in our family for generations. The vintage jewelry went in a special drawer in the master bedroom. Harold's Civil War memorabilia went in the basement, carefully stored and catalogued. My Depression-era glassware was displayed in the kitchen cabinets. Everything had a place, and I felt like my history was being preserved and respected. Sarah would often comment on how much the antiques added to their home. "Mom, these pieces are just gorgeous. They make our house feel so much more elegant and sophisticated." Mike would nod along, though I always got the feeling he didn't really care about antiques one way or another. But he seemed happy to have me there helping with Tommy and the housework, so I thought everything was working out perfectly. Tommy and I developed such a special bond during this time. He became my little helper in the kitchen, standing on a step stool to help me stir cookie batter or roll out pie dough. We'd work on his homework together every afternoon. I'd read him bedtime stories about princes and dragons and magical kingdoms. On weekends, we'd take long walks around the neighborhood and I'd point out different types of flowers and birds. He was like a little sponge, absorbing everything I taught him. But Tommy was also incredibly observant for such a young child. Sometimes I'd catch him watching his parents with this serious expression on his face, like he was trying to figure something out. When I'd ask him what he was thinking about, he'd just shrug and say, "Nothing, Grandma." But I could tell there was something going on in that little head of his. There were small things that I noticed but chose to ignore at first. Sometimes I'd hear Sarah and Mike talking in hushed voices that would stop when I entered the room. Occasionally, I'd find them looking through papers at the kitchen table that they'd quickly put away when I appeared. Mike would get phone calls that he'd take outside on the porch, speaking in low tones that I couldn't quite make out through the window. I told myself I was just being paranoid. After Harold died, I'd become more sensitive to everything, more likely to read negative meanings into innocent situations. These were probably just normal household discussions about bills or work or Tommy's school activities. There was no reason for me to be suspicious of my own daughter and son-in-law. Sarah had always been good with money, much better than I ever was. Harold had handled all our finances when he was alive, and after he passed, I'd relied heavily on Sarah to help me understand things like investments and insurance policies. She'd explained everything to me in simple terms, helped me set up automatic bill payments, and made sure I understood exactly how much money I had available each month from Harold's pension and Social Security. "Mom, you're actually in really good shape financially," she told me shortly after I moved in. "Dad left you well provided for, and with the money from selling the house, you have a nice nest egg. Plus, all those antiques are worth quite a bit of money if you ever need to sell them." At the time, I'd been relieved to know that I wouldn't be a financial burden on Sarah and Mike. I could contribute to household expenses and still have enough left over to leave Tommy a nice inheritance someday. But looking back now, I wonder if that conversation planted some kind of seed in Sarah's mind. Did she start calculating exactly how much my belongings were worth? Did she and Mike start seeing dollar signs instead of family heirlooms? I hate that I even have to think these thoughts about my own daughter, but after what happened, I can't help but question everything. The first real sign that something was wrong came about 6 months after I moved in. I was looking for my jewelry box to get out my pearls for church, and I couldn't find it in its usual place in Sarah's dresser drawer. When I asked her about it, she seemed flustered for just a moment before explaining that she'd moved it to a safer place because Tommy had been getting into things. "You know how curious he is, Mom. I just thought it would be better to keep your valuable pieces somewhere he couldn't accidentally break them." She produced the jewelry box from her closet and everything appeared to be there, so I didn't think much more about it. But there was something about the way she'd hesitated before answering that stuck with me. Then there were the visitors. People I'd never seen before would occasionally stop by the house when Sarah and Mike thought I was napping or out for my afternoon walk. I'd see unfamiliar cars in the driveway, hear voices in the living room, and when I'd come downstairs to see if we had guests, Sarah would quickly explain that it was just someone from work or a neighbor stopping by. These visitors never stayed long, and they always seemed to leave before I could properly meet them. One afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping to find a man I'd never seen before examining my grandmother's china cabinet very carefully. He was running his hands along the wood, opening drawers and peering at the manufacturer's marks on the bottom of the dishes. When he saw me, he looked startled, and Sarah quickly appeared to explain that he was just a friend who appreciated antiques. "This is Jim, Mom. He works with Mike. He's always been interested in old furniture, so I was just showing him some of your beautiful pieces." Jim smiled and nodded, but something about the interaction felt off. He seemed more like he was appraising the furniture than admiring it. And why would Mike's work friend be in our house looking at my belongings when Mike wasn't even home? I started paying closer attention after that. I noticed that Sarah had become very interested in the stories behind my antiques, asking detailed questions about where we'd bought each piece, how much we'd paid for them, and whether I had any documentation about their value or authenticity. At first, I was delighted by her interest. I'd always hoped that someone in the family would want to preserve the history of these pieces. "Oh, Mom, this is such a beautiful necklace. Do you remember where Grandma got it? Do you have any papers that show how old it is?" Sarah would ask as we looked through my jewelry together. Or she'd run her hands over a vintage vase and say, "This is so unique." I bet pieces like this are really rare nowadays. I'd tell her everything I knew, sharing the stories Harold and I had collected along with the items themselves. How we'd found the Civil War sword at an estate sale in a tiny town outside Milwaukee. How the previous owner had sworn it belonged to his great-great-grandfather who'd fought at Gettysburg. How my grandmother's wedding ring had been her mother's before that, making it nearly 100 years old. How Harold had saved for 6 months to buy me the vintage emerald brooch for our 20th anniversary. Sarah seemed fascinated by every detail, taking notes sometimes, asking me to repeat certain information. I want to make sure I remember all these stories correctly, Mom. These pieces are family history and I want to be able to tell Tommy about them someday. Her interest made me so happy. I'd been worried that younger generations didn't care about preserving the past, but here was my own daughter wanting to learn about our family's treasures. But Tommy seemed less enthusiastic about his mother's newfound interest in antiques. Sometimes when Sarah would be asking me questions about a particular piece, I'd notice Tommy watching us with that same serious expression I'd seen before. Once, when Sarah was examining a particularly valuable vintage clock and asking about its origins, Tommy actually interrupted us. "Mom, why do you care so much about old stuff?" he asked with the blunt honesty that only children possess. Sarah laughed it off, saying she just wanted to appreciate her grandmother's beautiful things, but I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Annoyance? Guilt? I couldn't quite identify it at the time. As months passed, I settled deeper into the routine of living with my family. I was happy, or at least I thought I was. Tommy continued to be the light of my life, always ready with hugs and questions and stories about school. Sarah seemed appreciative of all the help I provided around the house. Mike was Mike. Polite but distant, always working or watching television, never really engaging in long conversations with me. But there were more small incidents that, looking back, should have raised red flags. Papers that went missing from my room and then reappeared in different places. Phone calls that were clearly about me but stopped when I entered the room. Conversations between Sarah and Mike that ended abruptly when I appeared. One evening, I overheard part of a conversation that confused me at the time. I was coming downstairs to get a glass of water and I heard Sarah and Mike talking in the kitchen. "We can't wait much longer," Sarah was saying. "The market is good right now and who knows how long that will last." Mike's response was too quiet for me to make out, but Sarah's voice got more urgent. "She trusts us completely. She won't even question it." When I entered the kitchen, they both looked startled and quickly changed the subject to something about Tommy's soccer schedule. I assumed they were talking about some kind of investment or maybe selling their own belongings, so I didn't think much about it. But the phrase "she trusts us" completely echoed in my mind. Why would Sarah need to point out that someone trusted them? And who was this she they were referring to? Tommy's behavior started changing slightly around this time too. He began spending more time in his room, and when he was with me he seemed more clingy than usual. He'd want to sit extra close to me when we watched television together, and he started asking strange questions like, "Grandma, will you always live with us?" And, "Grandma, would you be sad if you had to move away?" When I'd ask him why he was asking such questions, he'd just say he was wondering. But something about his tone suggested that these weren't just idle childhood curiosities. It was like he'd heard something that worried him but didn't quite understand what it meant. I tried to reassure him. "Tommy, sweetheart, I'm very happy living here with you and your parents. This is my home now." But even as I said the words, I realized I wasn't entirely sure they were true. Was this really my home? I was living in Sarah and Mike's house, surrounded by their furniture and their rules and their schedules. My belongings were displayed throughout the house, but they weren't really in my control anymore. Still, I pushed these doubts aside. This was my family. Sarah was my daughter, the child I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for. Tommy was my precious grandson, the joy of my golden years. Mike was my daughter's husband, and that made him family too. I had no reason to be suspicious or paranoid. I was just an old woman adjusting to a new living situation, and it was natural that there would be some bumps along the way. But Tommy seemed to be watching everything more carefully as time went on. I'd catch him listening at doorways when his parents were talking privately. He'd ask me questions about my belongings, not out of curiosity like before, but with a worried expression. "Grandma, where did you put your special ring? The one Grandpa gave you?" When I'd show him that it was safely in my jewelry box, he'd seem relieved but still concerned about something. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October when everything changed. Sarah and Mike had both gone to work and Tommy was at school. I was alone in the house, which was unusual because I typically did my errands while they were gone, but I'd been feeling a bit tired and decided to stay home and rest. I was sitting in the living room, looking at my grandmother's china cabinet and thinking about all the meals we'd shared using those dishes over the years. The afternoon sunlight was streaming through the windows, making the glassware sparkle, and I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. This was good, I thought. My belongings were safe, my family was caring for me, and Tommy was thriving with his grandmother nearby. That's when I heard the front door open and Tommy's voice calling out, "Grandma? Are you here?" School had ended early due to a teacher's meeting, and he'd walked home by himself, which he sometimes did since we lived close to the elementary school. "I'm in the living room, sweetheart," I called back. Tommy appeared with his backpack still on, looking unusually serious for an 8-year-old who'd just gotten out of school early. He came over and sat next to me on the couch, close enough that our knees were touching. For a moment he just stared at his hands folded in his lap. Then he looked up at me with those bright blue eyes that reminded me so much of Harold. "Grandma," he said in a voice that was much more serious than usual, "I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to tell Mom and Dad that I told you." My heart started beating a little faster. Children don't usually ask for that kind of secrecy unless something is really wrong. "Tommy, what is it? Are you in some kind of trouble at school?" He shook his head. "No, it's not about school. It's about..." He paused and looked around the room as if making sure we were really alone. "It's about your stuff, Grandma. Your old stuff that you brought from your house." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What about my things, Tommy?" Tommy took a deep breath, like he was gathering courage for something very difficult. "Last week when you went to the doctor, I heard Mom and Dad talking in their bedroom. They thought I was playing video games, but I was listening because they sounded upset about something." I waited, not sure I wanted to hear what was coming next. "Mom said they need to start getting rid of your old stuff soon because the man who looks at old things said some of it is worth a lot of money, and they need the money for something important." Tommy's words came out in a rush, like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve if he didn't say everything quickly. My blood went cold. "What man, Tommy?" "The man who comes when you're not here sometimes. He looks at your dishes and your jewelry and writes things down in a little book. Mom calls him Jim, but I heard Dad call him something else once." This was the same Jim I'd met that day when I came home from grocery shopping. The one Sarah had said was just Mike's work friend who appreciated antiques. But Tommy was describing something much more systematic than casual admiration. "Tommy," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though my hands were starting to shake, "did you hear anything else? Did they say when they were planning to get rid of my things?" Tommy nodded and I could see tears starting to form in his eyes. "They said they have to do it soon before you start asking questions. And Mom said you trust them so much that you won't notice right away if things start disappearing one at a time." The room started spinning a little bit. My own daughter was planning to steal my belongings. Not just any belongings but family heirlooms that had been passed down through generations. Things that Harold and I had spent decades collecting and treasuring. Things that were supposed to go to Tommy someday, to continue our family's legacy. But I needed to be sure. Children sometimes misunderstand adult conversations, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions based on an 8-year-old's interpretation of something he'd overheard. "Tommy, are you absolutely certain about what you heard? Sometimes grown-ups talk about complicated things that can sound different than what they really mean." Tommy looked at me with an expression far too mature for his age. "Grandma, I know what I heard. And there's more." He glanced toward the stairs, checking again that we were alone. "They have papers hidden in Dad's closet. Papers with your name on them. I saw them when I was looking for my baseball glove that Mom said might be in there." "Papers with my name on them? What kind of papers would Sarah and Mike need to hide from me?" My mind was racing with possibilities, none of them good. Tommy reached over and took my hand, his small fingers intertwining with mine. "Grandma, I'm scared. I don't want them to take your stuff away. Those things are special to you and they tell stories about our family. It's not right for Mom and Dad to sell them without asking you." Out of the mouths of babes. This 8-year-old child had a better sense of right and wrong than my own grown daughter apparently did. I squeezed his hand and tried to smile, but I'm sure my expression wasn't very convincing. "Tommy, thank you for telling me this. You're a very brave boy and you did the right thing. But I need you to promise me something now. Don't let your parents know that you told me about this, okay? Can you promise me that?" He nodded solemnly. "I promise, Grandma." But what are you going to do? I honestly didn't know. How do you confront your own child about stealing from you? How do you prove something like this without evidence? And what if Tommy had misunderstood something innocent? But deep down I knew he hadn't misunderstood. All those little signs I'd been ignoring suddenly made perfect sense. The mysterious visitors, the sudden interest in my antiques, the hushed conversations that stopped when I appeared, the papers that moved around in my room. Sarah and Mike weren't just housing me out of the goodness of their hearts. They were housing me so they could systematically steal everything I owned. Tommy, I said, making a decision that would change everything, I need you to help me with something. Can you do that? He nodded eagerly. What do you need me to do, Grandma? I took a deep breath. You said there are papers in your dad's closet. Papers with my name on them. I need to see those papers. Do you think you could show me where they are when your parents aren't home? Tommy looked nervous but determined. I can show you, but we have to be really careful. Dad gets really mad when anyone goes in his closet without permission. We'll be very careful, sweetheart. And we'll make sure everything is put back exactly where we found it. Your parents will never know we were there. Tommy thought about this for a moment, then nodded. Hey, Grandma. But can we do it now while they're both at work? I don't want to get in trouble, but I also don't want them to steal your things. My heart broke a little bit hearing him worry about such adult problems. An 8-year-old should be thinking about homework and friends and what's for dinner, not whether his parents are thieves. But I was also incredibly proud of him for having the courage to tell me the truth and offer to help me find evidence. Yes, Tommy. Let's do it now. We went upstairs together and Tommy led me to his parents' bedroom. I felt like I was violating some fundamental boundary by going through their private belongings, but then I reminded myself that they were apparently violating a much more serious boundary by stealing from me. Tommy went straight to Mike's side of the walk-in closet and pointed to a box on the top shelf, partially hidden behind some winter coats. That's where I saw the papers with your name on them, Grandma. Dad had to get a chair to reach them when I saw him putting them back. I got the chair from Sarah's dressing table and climbed up carefully to reach the box. My arthritis made it difficult, but Tommy steadied the chair for me and I managed to get the box down safely. We sat on the bed together and I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were manila folders, each labeled with different categories: insurance, legal documents, financial records, and one that made my stomach drop: Margaret's assets. I opened that folder first, and what I found inside made me feel like the floor had disappeared beneath me. There were detailed lists of all my belongings with estimated values written next to each item. My grandmother's china set, $3,500. Harold's Civil War sword, $2,800. My vintage emerald brooch, $4,200. Page after page of my possessions reduced to dollar amounts. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the collection of documents that appeared to be official forms with my signature on them. Power of attorney papers, asset transfer documents, authorization forms for the sale of personal property. My signature was on all of them, but I had absolutely no memory of signing any of these papers. Tommy, I whispered, I never signed these documents. I never gave them permission to sell my things. Tommy peered at the papers with a confused expression. But that looks like your handwriting, Grandma. He was right. The signature did look exactly like mine. Which meant that either I was losing my memory more severely than I realized, or someone had been practicing my signature well enough to forge these documents. I kept looking through the papers and found copies of correspondence with auction houses, estate sale companies, and private collectors. Sarah and Mike had been systematically researching the value of everything I owned and making contacts with people who might want to buy it. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision born from financial desperation. This was a carefully planned operation to steal everything my late husband and I had spent our lives collecting. Then I found something that made me gasp out loud. A letter from a lawyer's office, discussing the process for having me declared mentally incompetent so that Sarah could take full control of my finances and belongings. The letter referenced documented evidence of confusion and memory issues that would support such a petition. What documented evidence? I wasn't confused or having memory issues. I was sharp as a tack, managing my own medications, handling my own banking, cooking meals, and helping Tommy with homework. But apparently Sarah had been building a case to have me declared incompetent anyway. Grandma, what's wrong? You look really pale, Tommy said, his voice full of concern. I realized I'd been staring at the lawyer's letter for several minutes without speaking. Tommy, these papers show that your parents are planning to take away all of my belongings and sell them. They're also trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so they can control all of my money. Tommy's eyes widened with understanding. Even at 8 years old, he grasped the betrayal involved in what his parents were doing. That's stealing, isn't it, Grandma? Even if they're family, taking your stuff without asking is still stealing. Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly what it is. I photographed the most important documents with my phone, then carefully put everything back in the box exactly as we'd found it. Tommy helped me position the box back on the shelf behind the winter coats, and we made sure the chair was returned to its original position. As we left the bedroom, Tommy looked up at me with those earnest blue eyes. Grandma, what are you going to do now? Are you going to tell Mom and Dad that you know? I honestly didn't know what I was going to do. Part of me wanted to confront Sarah immediately, to demand an explanation and give her a chance to make this right. But another part of me knew that confronting her without a solid plan would only give her the opportunity to hide the evidence and accelerate whatever timeline they were working on. Tommy, I need some time to think about this. Can you keep this secret a little bit longer while I figure out what the best thing to do is? He nodded seriously. I can keep the secret, Grandma. But I'm scared. What if they try to send you away? What if I don't get to see you anymore? The fear in his voice broke my heart. This little boy was worried about losing his grandmother, while his parents were apparently planning to get rid of me so they could steal my inheritance. The whole situation was so twisted and wrong that I could barely process it. Tommy, no matter what happens, I will always love you and I will always try to be part of your life. You are the most important thing in the world to me, do you understand that? He hugged me tightly and I felt tears starting to run down my cheeks. How had everything gone so wrong? How had I ended up in a situation where my own daughter was betraying me, and my 8-year-old grandson was the only person I could trust? We spent the rest of the afternoon together, but both of us were distracted by what we'd discovered. Tommy tried to act normal, telling me about his day at school and helping me prepare dinner, but I could see the worry in his expressions. And I was struggling to process the enormity of what I'd learned. When Sarah and Mike came home that evening, I found it almost impossible to act normally around them. Sarah gave me her usual kiss on the cheek and asked about my day, and it took everything I had not to confront her right then and there. Mike nodded his greeting and went straight to the television as usual, but now I found myself studying his face and wondering how long he'd been planning to steal from me. During dinner, I watched them both carefully, looking for signs of guilt or deception. Sarah seemed a little more chatty than usual, asking lots of questions about what Tommy and I had done during the day. Was she trying to determine if we'd discovered anything? Or was I just being paranoid because of what I now knew? Mike was his usual quiet self, focused on his food and occasionally commenting on something Tommy said about school. But when Sarah mentioned that her friend Jim might stop by again soon to look at some of Mom's beautiful antiques, I saw Tommy's expression change slightly. He glanced at me quickly, then back at his plate, but I could tell he was thinking about what we'd discussed earlier. That night, lying in my bed in what I'd thought was my new home, I stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what to do next. The evidence was clear. Sarah and Mike were planning to steal my belongings and possibly have me declared incompetent so they could control my money. But how do you fight your own family? How do you prove that the people who are supposed to love and protect you are actually planning to betray you? I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd found papers in my daughter's house suggesting she might be planning to sell my belongings? The documents I'd photographed looked official and my signature was on them, even though I had no memory of signing them. Would the police believe that my own daughter was forging my signature? Or would they assume I was a confused old woman who'd forgotten what she'd agreed to? I thought about calling a lawyer, but I didn't have a lawyer. Harold had handled all of our legal affairs, and when he died, Sarah had helped me find someone to handle the estate issues. For all I knew, that lawyer might be involved in whatever Sarah and Mike were planning. I thought about packing up my belongings and leaving, but where would I go? I'd sold my house to move in with Sarah and Mike. I didn't have any other family nearby, and at 72, starting over somewhere new seemed overwhelming and frightening. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't just do nothing. These weren't just random possessions Sarah and Mike were planning to steal. These were family heirlooms with deep sentimental value, items that represented decades of love and memories and history. Harold's Civil War sword wasn't valuable because of its monetary worth. It was valuable because he'd spent months searching for the perfect piece to add to his collection. My grandmother's china wasn't just dishes. It was the link to previous generations of women in my family who had served meals and celebrated holidays using those same plates. And beyond the sentimental value, there was a principle at stake. I had trusted Sarah and Mike completely, had put my entire life in their hands, and they were repaying that trust by planning to rob me. If I didn't stand up for myself, what kind of message would that send to Tommy about right and wrong? What kind of example would I be setting for him about how people should treat each other, even within families? As I lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, I made a decision. I was going to fight back. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I wasn't going to let my own daughter steal my heritage and my dignity without a battle. I owed it to Harold's memory, to my family's legacy, and to Tommy's future to stand up for what was right. But first, I needed to gather more evidence and figure out exactly what Sarah and Mike were planning. Tommy had given me the first piece of the puzzle, but I suspected there was much more to discover. And I had a feeling that when I found out the full extent of their betrayal, it was going to be even worse than I could imagine. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. I was going to find out exactly what my daughter and son-in-law were planning, and then I was going to stop them. I didn't know how yet, but I was determined to protect what was mine and preserve it for Tommy, who seemed to be the only member of my family who still understood the difference between right and wrong. Little did I know that what I'd already discovered was just the tip of the iceberg, and that the full truth would be so much more devastating than anything I could have imagined. The next few days after Tommy's revelation were the longest of my life. I found myself watching Sarah and Mike with completely different eyes, looking for signs of deception in every interaction. When Sarah would compliment one of my antique pieces, I wondered if she was actually calculating its resale value. When Mike would nod politely at my stories about Harold and our life together, I questioned whether he was just pretending to care while planning to profit from our memories. If you're finding this story as shocking as I did living through it, please take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps me share these important family stories with others who might be going through something similar. I decided I needed to investigate further before confronting them. Tommy had given me crucial information, but I needed to understand the full scope of what they were planning. I started paying closer attention to their daily routines, noting when they were both out of the house and when I might have opportunities to gather more evidence. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. 3 days after Tommy's confession, Sarah announced that she and Mike were going to attend a work party on Saturday evening. It's a company celebration for Mike's construction project completion, Mom. We'll probably be out until pretty late, so don't wait up for us. She seemed excited about the event, but I couldn't help wondering if this was just a convenient excuse to meet with their mysterious accomplices. Tommy was invited to spend Saturday night at his friend Jake's house for a birthday sleepover, which meant I would have the entire house to myself for several hours. As much as I loved Tommy and appreciated his help, I knew this investigation needed to be done alone. If I was caught snooping through Sarah and Mike's belongings, I didn't want Tommy to witness the confrontation that would surely follow. Saturday afternoon, I helped Tommy pack his overnight bag for the sleepover, trying to act normal despite my racing heart. Have fun at Jake's party, sweetheart. I'll see you tomorrow afternoon when his mom drops you off. Tommy hugged me extra tight before leaving, and I could tell he was worried about leaving me alone in the house. This 8-year-old boy had become my protector in ways that broke my heart. Sarah and Mike left around 6 o'clock, both dressed up nicely for their supposed work party. We'll be home late, Mom. Make sure you lock the doors and call us if you need anything. Sarah kissed my cheek, and for just a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt about what I was planning to do. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd raised and loved. Was I really about to search through her belongings looking for evidence that she was stealing from me? But then I remembered the documents I'd already seen, the forged signatures, the detailed lists of my possessions with their estimated values. Whatever maternal instincts were making me hesitate, the evidence was clear that Sarah had already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I waited until their car disappeared down the street, then gave them an extra 30 minutes in case they'd forgotten something and came back. My hands were shaking as I climbed the stairs to their bedroom, carrying the same chair I'd used before to reach Mike's hidden box. This time I was prepared to spend hours going through everything if necessary. The box was exactly where we'd left it, still partially concealed behind the winter coats. But when I opened it this time, I discovered there were more folders than I'd noticed during my quick look with Tommy. Underneath the Margaret's Assets folder were several others that made my blood run cold. Nursing home options, legal guardianship process, and property transfer timeline. I started with the nursing home options folder, and immediately understood why Tommy had been asking me questions about whether I'd be sad to move away. Sarah and Mike had been researching nursing homes for me, but not the kind of places where families send their loved ones when they can no longer care for them at home. These were budget facilities with terrible online reviews, places that charged minimal monthly fees because they provided minimal care. There were printed pages from websites showing small, overcrowded rooms, complaints about understaffing and poor food quality, and notes in Sarah's handwriting comparing the monthly costs. Sunset Manor, $1,800 per month, no activities, shared rooms. Riverside Care, $2,200 per month, basic medical supervision only. These weren't places where someone would send a family member they cared about. These were warehouses where inconvenient elderly relatives could be stored out of sight. But the most devastating part was a handwritten note from Sarah, apparently to Mike, that said, "Mom's Social Security and pension will cover these places easily, leaving all her other assets available for our use. The sooner we get her settled somewhere, the sooner we can start liquidating her belongings." Liquidating her belongings. That's how my daughter was thinking about the treasures Harold and I had spent decades collecting. Not as family heirlooms to be preserved, not as mementos of our love story, but as assets to be liquidated for cash. I moved on to the legal guardianship process folder, and discovered that Sarah and Mike had been working with a lawyer for months to have me declared mentally incompetent. There were emails discussing the best strategies for documenting my supposed confusion and memory issues. The lawyer had advised them to keep a journal of incidents where I seemed forgetful or disoriented, and I found several pages of Sarah's handwriting describing events that had either never happened or had been completely misrepresented. 11/3. Mom couldn't remember where she put her reading glasses, spent 20 minutes looking for them. Found them on her head. This was described as evidence of memory loss, but anyone who wears glasses occasionally forgets where they put them. It's not a sign of dementia. It's a sign of being human. November 8th. Mom seemed confused about what day it was when I asked her about doctor appointment. This was completely fabricated. I've always been very organized about my appointments and have never been confused about dates or times. November 12th. Mom left stove burner on after making tea. Dangerous forgetfulness. This was the most infuriating entry because it was describing something that had never happened. I'm extremely careful in the kitchen, always checking that burners are off before leaving the room. Sarah had apparently made up this incident entirely to support her case against me. Page after page of these fictional accounts of my supposed mental decline, carefully crafted to paint a picture of an elderly woman who could no longer manage her own affairs. The lawyer's correspondence made it clear that with enough documented incidents, they could petition the court to grant Sarah full guardianship over me and control of all my finances and property. But the property transfer timeline folder was the most detailed and devastating of all. Sarah and Mike had created a month-by-month plan for systematically selling off my belongings over the course of a year. They'd already identified buyers for many pieces, and had scheduled evaluations with various dealers and collectors. December, Civil War memorabilia to collector in Chicago, estimated $8,500. This was Harold's prized collection, pieces he'd spent years researching and acquiring. The idea of some stranger in Chicago owning Harold's treasures made me physically sick. January, vintage jewelry to estate buyer, estimated $12,000. My grandmother's ring, my mother's brooch, the emerald necklace Harold had given me for our anniversary, all reduced to a single line item in their profit plan. February, china and glassware to antique dealer, estimated $6,500. The dishes that had served Christmas dinners and birthday celebrations for 3 generations of my family, sold to strangers who would never know their history or significance. They had researched everything thoroughly, contacting multiple potential buyers to ensure they got the best prices. There were business cards from auction houses, estate sale companies and private collectors. Email correspondence discussing pickup dates and payment terms. This wasn't a desperate attempt to raise quick cash. This was a carefully orchestrated plan to steal everything I owned while I was powerless to stop them. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was a calendar with specific dates marked for different phases of their plan. December 15th, move mom to Sunset Manor. This was less than 6 weeks away. December 20th, begin property removal. January 30th, house sale consultation. They were planning to sell the house too, the house I'd thought was going to be my home for the rest of my life. I found copies of documents they'd already prepared, transferring ownership of my belongings to Sarah under the guardianship arrangement they were pursuing. My signature had been forged on form after form, granting them authority to make decisions about my healthcare, my living situation, my finances, and my property. Someone had spent considerable time practicing my handwriting, because these signatures were nearly perfect replicas. There were also records of conversations with the budget nursing homes, confirming availability for a new resident in December. One facility had already agreed to accept me based on Sarah's representation that I was suffering from early-stage dementia and could no longer live independently. They described me as confused, forgetful, and occasionally aggressive, none of which was true, but which would make the nursing home staff treat me as a difficult patient from the moment I arrived. I sat on Sarah and Mike's bed, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, and felt something inside me break. This wasn't just theft. It was a complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my family. My daughter, the child I'd raised with love and sacrifice, was planning to warehouse me in a substandard facility so she could steal my life savings and sell off everything Harold and I had treasured. But there was more. Hidden in the very back of the legal guardianship process folder, I found a document that made me gasp out loud. It was a life insurance policy on me that I'd never seen before, with Sarah listed as the beneficiary. The policy was for $200,000, and according to the paperwork, it had been purchased 6 months ago using my own money from my savings account. Someone had forged my signature on the insurance application, used my money to pay the premiums, and arranged for Sarah to collect a substantial payout when I died. Combined with the plan to put me in a substandard nursing facility where I'd receive minimal medical care, a terrifying picture was emerging. Were Sarah and Mike not just planning to steal my belongings? Were they actually hoping I'd die sooner rather than later so they could collect this insurance money too? I photographed everything with my phone, trying to stay calm and methodical despite the shock and heartbreak I was feeling. This evidence needed to be preserved because I was now certain that I was in real danger. My own family wasn't just planning to rob me, they might be planning to hasten my death for financial gain. As I was putting the documents back in their folders, trying to arrange everything exactly as I'd found it, I heard a sound that made my heart stop. A car door slamming in the driveway. Sarah and Mike were home much earlier than expected. I frantically shoved the last folder back into the box and climbed up on the chair to return it to its hiding place behind the winter coats. My arthritis made me clumsy and I nearly dropped the box as I tried to position it correctly. I could hear voices outside, Sarah and Mike talking as they approached the front door. I managed to get the box back in position and climbed down from the chair, but I realized I'd left my phone on the bed with all the photos I'd taken still visible on the screen. I grabbed the phone and was returning the chair to its original position when I heard the front door open downstairs. "Mom, we're home early," Sarah called out. The party was pretty boring, so we decided not to stay long. "I'll be right down," I called back, trying to make my voice sound normal. I did a quick scan of the bedroom to make sure everything looked exactly as it should, then headed downstairs to face my daughter, knowing what I now knew about her true intentions. Sarah and Mike were in the kitchen, Mike getting a beer from the refrigerator while Sarah sorted through the mail that had arrived that day. They both looked completely normal, like any married couple returning home from a social event. If I hadn't just spent 2 hours discovering their plan to rob me and warehouse me in a nursing home, I would have thought they were just my caring daughter and son-in-law, home from a nice evening out. "How was your evening, Mom? Did you have a quiet night?" Sarah asked, giving me the same affectionate smile she'd been giving me for months while secretly planning my destruction. "It was fine, dear. I watched some television and went to bed early." The lie came easily, probably because I was still in shock from what I'd discovered. How do you make small talk with someone who's been forging your signature and planning to steal your life savings? The party was okay, but you know how these work things are. Same conversations, same people complaining about the same problems, Mike said, taking a long drink from his beer. He seemed completely relaxed, showing no signs of guilt or anxiety about the detailed theft plan he'd helped create. Sarah sat down at the kitchen table and started opening bills, acting like this was just another normal Saturday night in our happy family home. "Oh, Mom, I forgot to mention that my friend Jim might stop by again next week. He's really interested in learning more about some of your antique pieces. You don't mind, do you?" The casual way she asked this question, knowing what I now knew about Jim's real purpose, made me feel nauseous. Jim wasn't her friend and he wasn't interested in learning about my antiques. He was an appraiser who'd been helping them determine how much money they could get for stealing my possessions. "Of course, dear. Any time," I managed to say, though the words tasted bitter in my mouth. "Great. He's particularly interested in that Civil War sword collection of Dad's. He thinks pieces like that are really valuable to collectors these days." Sarah's tone was bright and conversational, as if we were discussing the weather instead of the systematic theft of Harold's treasured belongings. I excused myself and went upstairs to my room, claiming I was tired and wanted to get ready for bed. But once I closed my bedroom door, I collapsed into the chair by my window and let the full weight of what I'd discovered wash over me. My daughter, my own daughter, was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, steal everything I owned, warehouse me in a substandard nursing facility, and possibly collect life insurance money when the poor care inevitably shortened my life. I looked around my bedroom at the few personal belongings I'd been allowed to keep in this space that I'd thought was my new home. The family photos on my dresser, the small jewelry box with my everyday pieces, the Bible Harold had given me for our 10th wedding anniversary. How naive I'd been to think that Sarah and Mike had taken me in out of love and concern for my well-being. They'd taken me in so they could control and rob me more efficiently. I thought about Tommy, sleeping peacefully at his friend's house, unaware that his parents were criminals who were betraying his grandmother. What would happen to him when this all came to light? How would he feel when he learned that his parents were thieves? How would this affect his ability to trust people for the rest of his life? But I also thought about what Tommy had already shown me, that he had a clear sense of right and wrong, even when it meant going against his own parents. He'd risked getting in trouble to warn me about what he'd overheard. This 8-year-old boy had more integrity than his grown parents did. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything I'd learned. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Sarah and Mike were planning to rob me of everything Harold and I had worked for, everything we'd treasured, everything we'd hoped to pass down to future generations. They were going to destroy my independence, my dignity, and possibly my life for money. But I also spent that night planning. I wasn't going to be a victim. I wasn't going to let them succeed. I had evidence now, clear documentation of their intentions and their crimes. The forged signatures alone were probably enough to send them both to prison. The fraudulent life insurance policy was another serious crime. The plan to have me falsely declared incompetent was elder abuse on multiple levels. I had choices to make. I could confront Sarah and Mike directly, giving them a chance to explain themselves and hopefully make this right. I could take my evidence to the police and let them handle the criminal aspects of what my family was planning. I could contact a lawyer and pursue legal protection of my assets and my rights. I could pack up what I could carry and leave, starting over somewhere else at 72 years old. None of these options seemed good. Confronting Sarah and Mike would likely just warn them to hide their evidence and accelerate their timeline. Going to the police felt like betraying my own family, even though they'd already betrayed me. Finding a lawyer would take time I might not have, especially if they were planning to move me to a nursing home in just 6 weeks. And leaving would mean abandoning Tommy and giving up any chance of preserving the belongings that connected me to Harold and our life together. But as I lay there in the darkness, I realized that there might be another option. What if I could turn their own plan against them? What if I could use their timeline and their overconfidence to set a trap that would expose them before they could harm me or steal my belongings? It was a risky strategy, and it would require me to continue pretending that I didn't know what they were planning while I gathered more evidence and made my own preparations. But it might be the only way to protect myself and Tommy while ensuring that Sarah and Mike faced consequences for what they were doing. I thought about Harold and what he would advise me to do in this situation. He'd always been a practical man, someone who believed in taking action rather than hoping problems would solve themselves. "Margaret," he used to say, "when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time." Sarah and Mike had shown me exactly who they really were. Now I needed to decide what I was going to do about it. The next morning, Tommy came home from his sleepover full of excitement about Jake's birthday party and the fun they'd had staying up late playing video games. His innocent joy was a sharp contrast to the dark knowledge I was carrying about his parents' plans. I made him his favorite breakfast pancakes with chocolate chips, and listened to his chatter about the sleepover, trying to act normal while my mind raced with everything I'd learned. "Did you have a good night, Grandma? You look tired," Tommy said, studying my face with that perceptive way he had. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I just didn't sleep very well. Sometimes old people have trouble sleeping," I told him, which was true even if it wasn't the whole truth. Sarah and Mike were both in good moods that Sunday morning, probably feeling confident about their secret plans and their timeline for robbing me. Sarah made coffee and chatted about maybe going to see a movie later, while Mike read the newspaper and made comments about the football game scheduled for that afternoon. They seemed like a perfectly normal family enjoying a relaxed Sunday morning together. But I kept thinking about the documents I'd seen, the detailed plans for selling Harold's Civil War collection to a stranger in Chicago, the arrangements to warehouse me in a nursing home where I'd receive minimal care, the life insurance policy they'd purchased with my own money to profit from my death. Every normal family moment felt like an elaborate performance designed to keep me unsuspecting until they were ready to spring their trap. "Mom, I was thinking we should probably schedule you a doctor's appointment soon for your annual checkup," Sarah said as she refilled my coffee cup. "It's important for people your age to stay on top of their health monitoring." Was this part of their plan too? Were they hoping a doctor would find some reason to declare me incompetent, or were they planning to tell the doctor I was showing signs of dementia? I'd seen enough of their falsified records to know that they weren't above lying to medical professionals to support their scheme. "That's a good idea, dear. I've been feeling fine, but it's always wise to be proactive about health issues," I replied, even though I was now suspicious of every suggestion they made about my care. "Great. I'll call Dr. Peterson's office tomorrow and set something up. I think I should probably come with you to the appointment, just to make sure we don't miss anything important," Sarah continued. Of course she wanted to come with me. That would give her the opportunity to influence what the doctor heard about my mental state and physical condition. She could make comments about my supposed confusion or forgetfulness, creating a medical record that would support their guardianship petition. I spent that Sunday observing my family with completely different eyes than I'd had just a week earlier. Tommy remained the same loving, honest child he'd always been, but now I could see that he was carrying adult worries that no 8-year-old should have to bear. Sarah maintained her facade of being a caring daughter, but now I could see the calculation behind her concern and the deception underlying her questions about my belongings. Mike continued to be politely distant, but now I understood that his lack of engagement with me wasn't just personality difference. It was the emotional detachment of someone who was planning to profit from my destruction. By Sunday evening I had made my decision. I wasn't going to confront them yet, and I wasn't going to run away. I was going to use the next 6 weeks to gather more evidence, make my own legal preparations, and find a way to protect both myself and Tommy from the fallout that was coming. Sarah and Mike thought they were the only ones with a plan, but they were about to discover that this 72-year-old grandmother wasn't as helpless as they'd assumed. I had spent my entire adult life being taken care of by Harold, letting him handle the complicated aspects of our finances and legal affairs. After he died, I'd relied on Sarah to help me navigate those same complexities. But now I realized that my dependence on others had made me vulnerable to the very people I should have been able to trust most. It was time for me to learn how to protect myself. It was time for me to fight back. And it was time for Sarah and Mike to discover that stealing from family isn't as easy as they thought it would be, especially when their victim refuses to be a victim. The next morning, while Sarah and Mike were at work and Tommy was at school, I started making phone calls. I was going to need professional help, a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse, a financial advisor who could help me protect my assets, maybe even a private investigator who could gather additional evidence of their crimes. I didn't know exactly how I was going to stop them yet, but I knew that doing nothing wasn't an option. Harold used to say that the best defense is a good offense. Sarah and Mike had been playing offense for months, systematically planning their attack on my independence and my belongings. But now it was my turn to take the offensive, and they had no idea what was coming their way. As I dialed the first phone number, a law office that advertised expertise in elder law and family disputes, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Harold's death, a sense of purpose and determination. I was going to fight for what was mine. I was going to protect Tommy from his parents' crimes, and I was going to make sure that Sarah and Mike faced consequences for their betrayal. They thought they were dealing with a confused old woman who would be easy to manipulate and control. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The following week changed everything I thought I knew about the situation I was in. I had contacted a lawyer specializing in elder abuse, scheduled meetings with a financial advisor, and even spoken with a private investigator about documenting Sarah and Mike's criminal activities. I felt like I was finally taking control of my life again, fighting back against the people who had planned to destroy me. But I was about to discover that everything was so much worse than I had imagined. The truth I uncovered would shake me to my very core and reveal a level of betrayal that I never could have conceived possible from my own family. If this story is making your heart race like mine was during these terrible days, please hit that subscribe button. Sharing these experiences helps other families recognize the warning signs before it's too late. It started with a phone call that I accidentally overheard. I was in the laundry room folding Tommy's school clothes when I heard Sarah talking on her cell phone in the kitchen, her voice more animated and excited than usual. Something in her tone made me stop what I was doing and listen more carefully. "Yes, everything is going exactly according to plan," she was saying to whoever was on the other end. "The evaluation went perfectly and she has no idea what's coming." Matthews was very cooperative about documenting her declining mental state. My blood went cold. Matthews was my family doctor, the physician I'd been seeing for 15 years. What evaluation was Sarah talking about? And when had Dr. Matthews documented any declining mental state? I'd been to see him just 2 months ago for my regular checkup, and he told me I was in excellent health for my age, both physically and mentally. The insurance policy is all set up, and the nursing home has confirmed they'll have a bed available December 15th, just like we planned, Sarah continued. Once she's there, we can start moving the valuable pieces out of the house without her knowing. Jim says the Civil War collection alone should bring in at least $10,000, maybe more if we find the right collector. I pressed myself against the laundry room wall, trying to hear every word while staying hidden from view. This was confirmation of everything I'd discovered in their documents, but hearing Sarah discuss it so casually, so callously, made it feel even more real and terrifying. No, Tommy doesn't suspect anything. He's just a kid, he doesn't understand what's happening. And even if he did figure something out, who would believe him over us? Sarah laughed and the sound made me sick to my stomach. We're his parents, we're responsible adults with good reputations. If he started saying crazy things about us stealing from his grandmother, people would just assume he was confused or making up stories. So they had considered the possibility that Tommy might discover their plan, and they'd decided they could discredit him if necessary. My heart broke thinking about what this would do to that innocent little boy who had already shown such courage in trying to protect me. The best part is that she trusts us completely, Sarah went on. She signed all those documents without even reading them carefully because she believes we have her best interests at heart. She has no idea that we've been planning this for almost a year. A year. They'd been planning to rob me and warehouse me in a nursing home for almost a year, probably since shortly after I'd moved in with them. All those months when I'd thought we were becoming a happy multi-generational family, they'd been systematically plotting my destruction. Matthews has been incredibly helpful. When I explained the situation to him, how Mom has been getting confused and forgetful, how we're worried about her safety, he agreed that it would be best for everyone if she were in a supervised care facility. He's already prepared the medical documentation we'll need for the guardianship petition. This was impossible. Matthews had known me for 15 years. He'd seen me through Harold's illness and death, had monitored my health and my mental state closely during that difficult period. He knew I wasn't confused or forgetful. How could he be cooperating with Sarah's lies about my mental condition? But then Sarah said something that made my knees nearly buckle. I know $50,000 seems like a lot to pay him, but it's worth it to have a respected physician supporting our case. Once we get control of Mom's assets, $50,000 will seem like nothing compared to what we'll gain. They had bribed my doctor. My trusted family physician, the man I'd relied on for medical care and advice for 15 years, had been paid $50,000 to falsify records about my mental state. The medical documentation that would be used to steal my independence and my belongings was purchased with what was probably my own money. Sarah's conversation continued, but I was having trouble processing what I was hearing. The betrayal wasn't limited to my daughter and son-in-law. They had corrupted my doctor, the professional who was supposed to protect my health and advocate for my well-being. How many other people were involved in this conspiracy? Who else had been bought off to help them destroy me? The timing couldn't be better, Sarah was saying. Christmas is the perfect cover for moving her to the nursing home. We can tell everyone that she's been declining mentally and that the holidays were too overwhelming for her. People will assume we're being responsible and caring by getting her professional help. The holidays. They were planning to rip me away from Tommy during Christmas, the time of year when families are supposed to come together and celebrate their love for each other. Tommy would wake up Christmas morning to find that his grandmother had been shipped off to some horrible facility, and his parents would tell him it was for the best. Once she's settled at Sunset Manor, we can take our time selling everything. The house should bring in at least $300,000 in this market, maybe more. Combined with her savings, the insurance policy, and the antiques, we're looking at close to $500,000 total. $500,000. That's what my life was worth to my own daughter. That's what Harold's memory and our family's legacy had been reduced to in her mind, a profit margin to be calculated and collected. Sarah's call ended and I heard her footsteps moving toward the front of the house. I stayed frozen in the laundry room for several minutes, trying to process what I'd overheard. The situation was even worse than I'd discovered through the documents. They weren't just planning to steal from me, they had built an entire network of corruption to support their scheme. My doctor, who knew me personally and professionally, had been willing to sell his integrity for $50,000. But there was something else bothering me about what I'd overheard, something that didn't quite fit with the timeline I thought I understood. Sarah had mentioned that they'd been planning this for almost a year, but she'd also said that Tommy didn't suspect anything and wouldn't be believed if he tried to tell anyone. If Tommy didn't know what was happening, how had he learned about the documents in the closet? How had he known to warn me to look for evidence? That afternoon, while Sarah was at work and Mike was on a construction site, I asked Tommy to sit with me in the living room. I needed to understand exactly how he'd discovered his parents' plan, and I was starting to suspect that there was more to his involvement than I'd realized. Tommy, sweetheart, I need to ask you some important questions about what you told me last week. About your parents and my belongings. I tried to keep my voice calm and reassuring, but Tommy immediately looked worried. Are you in trouble because of what I told you, Grandma? I didn't mean to get you in trouble. No, honey, you're not in trouble and neither am I. But I need to understand exactly how you found out about those papers in your father's closet. Can you tell me again what happened? Tommy fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, looking uncomfortable. I told you already, Grandma. I heard Mom and Dad talking in their room about your stuff and then I saw the papers when I was looking for my baseball glove. But something in his expression told me there was more to the story. Tommy, it's very important that you tell me the complete truth. I'm not angry with you and you won't get in trouble, but I need to know exactly what happened. Tommy looked down at his hands for a long moment, then back up at me with those earnest blue eyes. Promise you won't be mad at me, Grandma? I promise, sweetheart. Whatever you need to tell me, I won't be angry. Tommy took a deep breath like he was preparing for something difficult. I wasn't looking for my baseball glove in Dad's closet. I was looking for evidence on purpose because I already knew they were planning something bad. My heart started racing. What do you mean you already knew, Tommy? I've been listening to their conversations for a long time, Grandma. Ever since you moved in with us, they've been saying mean things about you when they thought I couldn't hear. They talk about how much your old stuff is worth and how they can't wait until you're not living here anymore. This 8-year-old child had been conducting his own investigation of his parents' criminal activities. He'd been protecting me in ways I'd never imagined, trying to gather information that could help me defend myself. At first, I thought maybe they were just frustrated because it's crowded with 3 adults in the house, Tommy continued. But then I started hearing them talk about nursing homes and selling your things, and I realized they were planning to hurt you. How long have you been listening to their conversations, Tommy? Since last summer. They usually talk in their room after they think I'm asleep, but I learned how to sneak out of my room quietly and listen at their door. I know it's wrong to spy on people, but I was worried about you. Last summer. Tommy had been aware of his parents' plans for months, had been carrying this adult burden while trying to figure out how to protect his grandmother. I couldn't imagine the stress and fear this little boy had been living with. Tommy, why didn't you tell me sooner about what you were hearing? Tommy's eyes filled with tears. Because I wasn't sure if you would believe me. They're my parents and you're their mom, and I thought maybe you would think I was making up stories or being mean to them. I wanted to wait until I had proof that you could see for yourself. This child had been more strategic and thoughtful than most adults would have been in this situation. He'd understood that accusations without evidence wouldn't be enough, so he'd continued his dangerous eavesdropping until he could guide me to proof that I could verify myself. "There's something else, Grandma," Tommy said, his voice getting smaller. "Something I heard them say that scared me the most." I braced myself for whatever revelation was coming next. "What did you hear, sweetheart?" "Last week after you went to bed early they were talking about the insurance money again. Dad said that nursing homes like the one they picked don't take very good care of people, and that old people sometimes get sick and die there pretty quickly. Mom said that would actually make things easier because then they could have the house and all the money sooner." The room started spinning around me. Sarah and Mike weren't just planning to warehouse me in a substandard facility for convenience. They were counting on the poor care to shorten my life so they could collect the insurance money and inherit everything sooner. They were essentially planning my murder, just using neglect and poor medical care instead of more direct methods. "Mom said that 2 years in a place like Sunset Manor would probably be enough," Tommy continued, tears now streaming down his face. "She said that at your age, with the kind of care they provide there, you probably wouldn't last much longer than that anyway." 2 years. My daughter had calculated that 2 years of deliberate neglect in a substandard nursing home would likely kill me, and she was comfortable with that timeline because it meant she could profit from my death before she turned 50. I pulled Tommy into my arms and held him tight while he cried. This brave little boy had been living with the knowledge that his parents were planning to murder his grandmother, and he'd been trying to figure out how to stop them. No child should ever have to carry that kind of burden. "Tommy, you have been so incredibly brave and you've done nothing wrong. You've been trying to protect me, and that makes you the best grandson anyone could ask for. But what are we going to do, Grandma? How can we stop them? They're grown-ups with jobs and money and we're just a kid and an old lady. Who's going to believe us?" Out of the mouths of babes. Tommy had identified the exact challenge I'd been struggling with. How do you fight back against people who appear respectable and trustworthy when you're seen as vulnerable and potentially unreliable due to your age? "Tommy, I want you to know that I've been making plans to stop them. I've talked to lawyers and other people who help in situations like this. We're not as powerless as they think we are." Tommy looked up at me with hope in his eyes. "Really? You can stop them from putting you in that scary nursing home?" "I'm going to try my hardest, sweetheart. But I might need your help with something. Do you think you could be brave enough to help me gather more evidence of what they're planning?" Tommy wiped his eyes and nodded solemnly. "I can be brave for you, Grandma. What do you need me to do?" Over the next hour, Tommy and I developed our own plan. He would continue listening to his parents' conversations and report back to me about anything new he learned. I would continue photographing documents and gathering evidence while pretending to be oblivious to their scheme. Together we would build a case that would be strong enough to stop them and protect both of us. But as we talked, Tommy revealed even more disturbing information about his parents' plan. "They've been talking about what they're going to tell people about why you had to go to the nursing home," he said. "They're going to say that you started getting confused and saying strange things, and that you even accused them of trying to steal from you. They said that when old people start making accusations like that against their family, it's a sign that they're losing their mind." This was diabolical. Sarah and Mike had anticipated that I might eventually figure out what they were doing, and they'd prepared to discredit any accusations I made by characterizing them as the paranoid delusions of a woman suffering from dementia. If I tried to tell people that my family was stealing from me, they would use those very accusations as evidence that I was mentally incompetent and needed to be in supervised care. They said that Dr. Matthews would back them up if anyone questioned whether you really needed to be in the nursing home, Tommy continued. They said he would tell people that you'd been showing signs of paranoia and confusion for months. The web of corruption was even more extensive than I'd realized. Not only had they bribed Dr. Matthews to provide false medical documentation, but they'd prepared him to actively participate in discrediting me if I tried to defend myself. My own doctor would tell people that my attempts to expose the truth were actually symptoms of mental illness. But Tommy wasn't finished with his revelations. "There's something else, Grandma. Something about Uncle David." Uncle David was Sarah's younger brother, my son who lived in California with his wife and 2 teenage children. David and I had never been as close as Sarah and I had been, partly because of the distance and partly because he'd always been more focused on his career than on family relationships. But I'd never had any reason to think he was involved in whatever Sarah and Mike were planning. What about Uncle David, Tommy? He's been calling Mom and Dad a lot lately and they always take those calls in private. But last week I heard Mom tell Dad that Uncle David was getting impatient about his share of the money. She said they needed to speed up the timeline because David was threatening to come visit and see what was taking so long. David was involved too. My son, who I'd raised and loved and supported through college and his early career struggles, was also planning to profit from my destruction. He wasn't just a passive beneficiary waiting for his inheritance. He was an active participant in the scheme to rob me and potentially hasten my death. Mom told Dad that they promised Uncle David at least $100,000 from selling your stuff in the house, Tommy said. She said they had to give him that much to keep him quiet about what they were doing. $100,000. That was David's price for participating in the betrayal and potential murder of his own mother. My son had sold his integrity and his love for me for $100,000. As Tommy continued sharing what he'd overheard, a complete picture emerged of the conspiracy against me. It wasn't just Sarah and Mike acting alone. It was a network that included my son David, my Dr. Dr. Matthews, and probably others I hadn't discovered yet. They'd all been bought off or convinced to participate in stealing everything I owned and potentially cutting my life short for financial gain. The nursing home itself might be part of the conspiracy too. If they were willing to accept a patient based on false information about her mental state, and if they were known for providing substandard care that often led to premature deaths, they might be deliberately participating in what was essentially a murder scheme. That evening, after Sarah and Mike returned from work, I observed them with the complete knowledge of what they were planning. Every smile, every expression of concern for my well-being, every question about my health or my belongings was now revealed as part of an elaborate performance designed to keep me compliant until they were ready to destroy me. Mom, I scheduled that doctor's appointment we discussed, Sarah said as she prepared dinner. Matthews can see you next Friday afternoon. I'll drive you there and sit in on the appointment to make sure we don't miss anything important. Now I understood the real purpose of this appointment. Matthews would ask me questions designed to make me seem confused or forgetful. Sarah would be there to make comments about my supposed mental decline. Together, they would create a medical record that would support the guardianship petition and justify my forced placement in a nursing home. That's very thoughtful of you, dear, I replied, even though I now knew that this appointment was actually the next step in their plan to rob and potentially kill me. I've been thinking that we should also schedule some time to go through your belongings together, Mom. Maybe start organizing things and deciding what's most important to keep with you if you ever need to move to a smaller living situation, Sarah continued. They were going to have me help them inventory my own belongings before stealing them. They wanted me to participate in cataloging everything they planned to sell, probably so I couldn't later claim that they'd taken things without my knowledge. Mike looked up from his newspaper. That's a good idea, Sarah. Better to be prepared for any situation that might come up. Any situation that might come up. Like the situation they were creating by having me declared incompetent and shipped off to die in a substandard nursing home while they sold everything Harold and I had treasured. Tommy sat quietly through this conversation, eating his dinner and occasionally glancing at me with worried eyes. I could see the stress of keeping our shared secret weighing on him, but I was also proud of how brave he was being. This little boy was the only person in my family who still had a conscience, the only one who cared more about protecting me than profiting from my destruction. After dinner, while Sarah and Mike watched television in the living room, Tommy and I worked on his homework at the kitchen table. As he practiced his spelling words, he whispered updates about things he'd overheard. They're planning to have someone come look at the house next week while you're at the doctor, he said quietly. Mom called it a preliminary assessment, for when they're ready to sell. They were going to have the house appraised while I was being evaluated by my corrupt doctor. Everything was being coordinated to happen quickly and efficiently once they pulled the trigger on their plan. And Dad got a call today from someone who wants to buy Grandpa's Civil War stuff. They're supposed to meet this weekend when you're at church. They were lining up buyers for Harold's treasured collection, planning to sell the pieces that had meant so much to him while I was out of the house and unaware of what was happening. As Tommy and I continued our whispered conversation, I realized that we were running out of time. The appointment with Dr. Matthews was in 5 days. If that appointment went according to their plan, they would have the medical documentation they needed to have me declared incompetent. Once that happened, I would lose all legal control over my own life, my belongings, and my future. I had to act before Friday. I had to contact my lawyer, present all the evidence I'd gathered, and find a way to stop this conspiracy before it was too late. Tommy and I had uncovered a criminal enterprise that involved multiple people and could result in my death. But we were still just a 72-year-old woman and an 8-year-old boy trying to fight against people who appeared respectable and trustworthy to the outside world. But we had something that Sarah, Mike, David, and Dr. Matthews didn't have. We had the truth, we had evidence, and we had each other. Most importantly, we had right on our side, and sometimes that's enough to overcome even the most elaborate criminal conspiracy. The next morning, after Sarah and Mike left for work and Tommy went to school, I called my lawyer and told him I needed an emergency meeting. It was time to go on the offensive against the people who thought they could steal my life, my belongings, and my dignity without consequences. They were about to learn that this old grandmother wasn't as helpless as they'd assumed, and that their carefully laid plans were about to be turned against them in ways they never could have imagined. The emergency meeting with my lawyer, Robert Stevens, changed everything. When I walked into his office that Tuesday morning with my phone full of photographs and my heart full of rage, I thought I was just going to get legal advice about protecting my assets. I had no idea that by the end of that day I would have set in motion a series of events that would destroy my family forever, but would also save my life. Robert Stevens specialized in elder abuse cases, and he'd seen situations like mine before. But as I showed him the evidence I'd gathered, the forged documents, the detailed theft plans, the correspondence with the corrupt doctor, the life insurance policy purchased with my own money, his expression grew more serious than I'd ever seen on a professional's face. Margaret, what you're showing me isn't just elder abuse or financial exploitation. This is a criminal conspiracy that includes fraud, forgery, bribery of a medical professional, and what could arguably be considered attempted murder through deliberate neglect. He leaned back in his chair and studied the photographs on his computer screen. I've been practicing elder law for 23 years, and I've never seen a case this elaborate or this calculated. If you've been following this story and you're as shocked as I was to discover how far my own family was willing to go, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and share this video. Stories like this need to be told so that other families can recognize these warning signs before it's too late. What can we do to stop them? I asked. They're planning to have me declared incompetent on Friday, and then move me to that nursing home just 5 weeks from now. Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying the evidence and making notes on a legal pad. We have several options, but they all involve taking immediate and dramatic action. Once we start this process, there's no going back. Your relationship with your daughter and son-in-law will be permanently destroyed, and depending on what we discover through investigation, they could face serious criminal charges. I thought about Sarah, the little girl I'd raised and loved, the daughter I'd trusted with everything I owned and everything I was. The idea of sending her to prison made me feel physically sick. But then I thought about Tommy, and the burden this innocent child had been carrying as he tried to protect me from his own parents. I thought about Harold's Civil War collection being sold to strangers, about my grandmother's china being auctioned off to the highest bidder, about dying alone in a substandard nursing home while my family celebrated their financial windfall. What do I need to do? I asked. Robert outlined a strategy that was more aggressive and comprehensive than anything I could have imagined. First, we would immediately file for a restraining order against Sarah and Mike, preventing them from having any contact with me or access to my belongings. Second, we would contact the police and the district attorney's office to report the criminal conspiracy, providing all the evidence I'd gathered. Third, we would file a civil lawsuit to recover any of my assets that had already been stolen or compromised. Fourth, we would contact the state medical board to report Dr. Matthews for accepting bribes and falsifying medical records. But here's the most important part, Margaret, Robert said. We need to get you out of that house today before they realize what's happening. Do you have somewhere safe you can stay while we work through the legal process? I hadn't thought that far ahead. Where does a 72-year-old woman go when she discovers that her own family is trying to kill her for money? I didn't have any other relatives in Milwaukee, and I'd lost touch with most of my friends after Harold died and I moved in with Sarah and Mike. There's a residential facility specifically for people in situations like yours, Robert explained. It's called Safe Harbor, and it's designed to provide temporary housing and protection for elderly people who are victims of family abuse. It's not a nursing home, you'd have your own apartment and complete independence, but with security and support staff available if you need help. Safe Harbor. Even the name sounded like salvation after months of living with people who were planning my destruction. How quickly can this happen? I asked. I can have the paperwork filed within 2 hours. The police can execute the restraining order and escort you to collect your belongings this afternoon. You could be settled at safe harbor by tonight. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. After months of feeling helpless and vulnerable, I was finally taking control of my situation. But it also meant that by evening my daughter would know that I'd discovered her plan, and everything would change forever. There's one more thing, Margaret. What about your grandson? From what you've told me, he's been trying to protect you, and he'll be caught in the middle of this situation when everything comes to light. Tommy. My heart broke thinking about what this was going to do to him. He would come home from school to find police cars in his driveway, his grandmother gone, and his parents facing criminal charges. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his parents are criminals who were planning to murder his grandmother for money? Is there any way to protect him from the worst of this? I asked. Robert explained that because Tommy was a minor, he would likely be placed with other family members or in foster care while the criminal charges against his parents were resolved. Is there anyone else in your family who could take care of him? David. My son David, who was also part of the conspiracy, expecting his $100,000 share of the profits from my destruction. There was no one else in our family who could care for Tommy, and the people who should have been protecting him were the ones who had put him in danger. Robert, there's something else I need to tell you. My son David, who lives in California, is also involved in this conspiracy. Tommy overheard conversations indicating that David is expecting a significant payment from the sale of my belongings. Robert made more notes, his expression growing even more serious. Margaret, what you're describing is a multi-state criminal conspiracy involving at least 5 people: your daughter, her husband, your son, your doctor, and possibly others we haven't identified yet. This is going to be a major criminal case that could result in federal charges. The magnitude of what I was about to unleash hit me like a physical blow. My decision to fight back wasn't just going to affect Sarah and Mike. It was going to destroy multiple lives and tear apart what was left of my family. But the alternative was to let them succeed in their plan to steal everything I owned and potentially kill me through deliberate neglect. I need to do this, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. They've made their choice to betray me and use Tommy as a pawn in their criminal scheme. Now I have to make my choice to protect myself and him, even if it means destroying the family. Robert nodded and reached for his phone. Let's get started. The next few hours passed in a blur of legal documents, phone calls, and preparations. Robert filed the emergency restraining order and contacted the district attorney's office about the criminal conspiracy. A detective named Maria Santos was assigned to the case, and she reviewed my evidence with the focused intensity of someone who'd seen too many cases of family members preying on elderly relatives. Mrs. Johnson, what you've uncovered here is one of the most sophisticated elder abuse schemes I've encountered, Detective Santos told me as she studied the photographs on my phone. The level of planning and the number of people involved suggests that this isn't their first time doing something like this. We're going to need to investigate whether your family has victimized other elderly relatives or if Dr. Matthews has been involved in similar schemes with other patients. Other victims. The possibility that Sarah, Mike, and David had done this before, or that Dr. Matthews was running a systematic scheme to help families steal from elderly patients, made me feel even sicker. How many other grandmothers had been betrayed by their own families with the help of corrupt medical professionals? By 3 o'clock that afternoon, everything was in motion. The restraining order had been approved, and uniformed police officers were standing by to escort me back to Sarah and Mike's house to collect my belongings under legal protection. Detective Santos and her team would search the house for additional evidence while I gathered my personal items. Mrs. Johnson, I need to prepare you for what's about to happen, Detective Santos said as we drove toward the house that had been my home for the past year. Your daughter and son-in-law are going to be arrested today on multiple felony charges. Depending on what we find during our search, they could be facing 10 to 20 years in prison. Your grandson is going to witness his parents being taken away in handcuffs, and that's going to be traumatic for him regardless of how carefully we handle it. 20 years in prison. Sarah could spend 20 years behind bars for what she'd planned to do to me. Mike could grow old in a cell, never seeing Tommy graduate from high school or college, never walking him down the aisle at his wedding. And Tommy would grow up knowing that his parents had tried to murder his grandmother for money. Is there any way we can minimize the trauma for Tommy? I asked. We'll do our best, but there's no way to make this easy for him. The good news is that Child Services already has a plan in place for his immediate care. There's a foster family in the area who specializes in caring for children whose parents have been arrested, and they can take him tonight if necessary. Foster care. Tommy would be going from a loving home with his grandmother to living with strangers because his parents were criminals. The ripple effects of Sarah and Mike's greed were going to damage that innocent child for the rest of his life. When we pulled up in front of the house, I saw Sarah's car in the driveway. She was home early from work, which meant she might have already discovered that something was wrong. My heart was pounding as Detective Santos and 2 uniformed officers accompanied me to the front door. I used my key to enter the house, calling out, "Sarah? Like, I'm home," as if this was any other ordinary day. Sarah appeared from the kitchen, and I could immediately tell from her expression that something had changed. She looked tense and worried in a way I'd never seen before. "Mom, where have you been? I tried calling you several times today and your phone went straight to voicemail." Her voice had an edge to it that I'd never heard before, suspicious and almost accusatory. "I had some errands to run in town, dear. I forgot to charge my phone last night." I tried to sound casual, but I could see Sarah's eyes taking in the police officers who had entered behind me. "What's going on? Why are there police officers in our house?" Sarah's voice was getting higher and more strained. Detective Santos stepped forward and introduced herself. "Ms. Peterson, I'm Detective Santos with the Milwaukee Police Department. We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with an ongoing investigation into elder abuse and financial exploitation." The color drained from Sarah's face. "Elder abuse? What are you talking about? There's no elder abuse happening here. My mother lives with us by choice and we take excellent care of her." "Ms. Peterson, we also have warrants for your arrest and the arrest of Michael Peterson on charges including conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, bribery of a medical professional and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." Detective Santos was calm and professional, but I could see Sarah starting to panic. "This is insane. Mom, what did you tell them? What lies did you make up?" Sarah turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, not just anger but pure hatred. In that moment, I saw who my daughter really was beneath the facade of caring and concern she'd maintained for so many months. "I didn't make up anything, Sarah. I found the documents in Mike's closet. I know about the nursing home, the forged signatures, the bribed doctor, the life insurance policy. I know everything." Sarah's face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, anger, and then something that looked almost like relief. "You have no idea what you've done, do you? Do you have any concept of how much this family has sacrificed to take care of you? We gave up our privacy, our space, our freedom to give you a place to live, and this is how you repay us." The officers were reading Sarah her rights, but she kept talking, her voice getting louder and more venomous. "You're a selfish old woman who's going to destroy this entire family because you can't stand the idea that someone else might benefit from your precious antiques when you're dead. Well, congratulations, Mom. You've succeeded in making sure that Tommy grows up without parents, that our lives are ruined, that everything we've worked for is destroyed. Sarah, you were planning to steal everything I own and put me in a nursing home where I would die from neglect so you could collect life insurance money. You involved Tommy in your criminal conspiracy and traumatized him by making him carry adult secrets. You corrupted a doctor and forged legal documents. I didn't destroy this family, you did." Mike arrived home just as Sarah was being placed in handcuffs. He took one look at the scene and tried to run, but the officers were ready for him. Within minutes, both Sarah and Mike were in custody, and Tommy was walking up the driveway from his school bus, about to discover that his world had just been turned upside down. Tommy saw the police cars and broke into a run toward the house. When he saw his parents in handcuffs, he stopped dead in his tracks, his face going pale with shock and confusion. "Grandma? What's happening? Why are Mom and Dad being arrested?" I knelt down to Tommy's level and pulled him close to me. "Tommy, your parents were planning to do some very bad things to hurt me and steal from me. The police found out about their plan, and now they have to face the consequences for what they were going to do." Tommy looked at his parents, then back at me, his eyes filling with tears. "Are they going to prison, Grandma?" "Probably, sweetheart. I'm so sorry this is happening. I know this is scary and confusing, but you need to understand that what they were planning was very wrong, and when people do wrong things they have to face punishment. Sarah, even with her hands cuffed behind her back, managed to turn toward us. Tommy, don't listen to her. Grandma is sick and confused and she's made up stories about us because she's losing her mind. We never planned to hurt anyone. We love you and we love her, and this is all a terrible mistake. But Tommy, wise beyond his 8 years, looked at his mother with an expression of profound disappointment. Mom, I heard you and Dad talking about the nursing home and the insurance money. I heard you say that Grandma would probably die there in 2 years and then you could have everything. I know you're lying. Sarah's face crumpled as she realized that her own son had been the source of the information that brought down their criminal conspiracy. Tommy, you don't understand what you heard. Adults sometimes say things that sound different than what they mean. I understand perfectly, Mom. You and Dad were going to steal from Grandma and put her somewhere terrible so she would die and you could take her money. That's called murder and it's wrong. Tommy's voice was steady, but tears were streaming down his face. As Sarah and Mike were taken away in separate police cars, Tommy and I stood in the driveway watching our family disintegrate. A social worker arrived to discuss Tommy's placement, and I learned that I could apply to become his legal guardian, but it would take time and investigation to determine if that was in his best interest. Tommy, you're going to stay with a very nice foster family for a while, until we can figure out what's best for everyone, the social worker explained gently. Your grandmother is going through some big changes too, and we need to make sure both of you are safe and cared for. Tommy hugged me tightly and I could feel his small body shaking with sobs. I don't want to go live with strangers, Grandma. I want to stay with you. We're the only good people left in our family. I want that too, sweetheart. And I'm going to fight to make that happen. But for now, we both need to be brave and trust that things will work out the way they're supposed to. Over the following weeks, the full scope of the criminal conspiracy began to emerge. Matthews was arrested and his medical license suspended pending investigation. The police discovered that he'd been involved in similar schemes with at least 6 other families, helping adult children steal from their elderly parents by providing false medical documentation about their mental competence. David was arrested at his home in California and extradited to Wisconsin to face charges. When confronted with the evidence, he broke down and confessed that Sarah had approached him about the scheme almost a year earlier, promising him a significant share of the profits if he stayed quiet and didn't interfere. He claimed he'd never intended for me to be hurt, but the recorded phone calls between him and Sarah told a different story. The nursing home that had agreed to accept me based on false information was investigated and found to be operating without proper licenses and providing substandard care that had contributed to the premature deaths of several residents. The facility was shut down, and its operators faced criminal charges of their own. As for my belongings, many items had already been sold to private collectors and dealers who thought they were purchasing legitimately owned antiques. The legal process of recovering those items would take months or years, and some pieces would never be found. Harold's Civil War sword collection, my grandmother's china, and several pieces of vintage jewelry were gone forever, sold to strangers who would never know their history or significance. The trial began 6 months later, and it was covered extensively by local and national media as an example of how elder abuse had evolved into sophisticated criminal enterprises. Sarah, Mike, and David all pled guilty to avoid longer prison sentences, but they still received substantial terms. Sarah got 12 years, Mike got 10 years, and David got 8 years. Matthews received 15 years and lost his medical license permanently. During his sentencing hearing, it was revealed that he'd collected more than $300,000 over 5 years by helping families steal from elderly relatives. Throughout this process, Tommy remained in foster care while I worked to become his legal guardian. The investigation into my fitness as a caretaker was thorough and sometimes painful, as social workers questioned whether someone my age could provide proper care for a young child. But Tommy advocated for himself, telling anyone who would listen that I was the only person who had ever protected him and that he wanted to live with me. 8 months after that terrible day when his parents were arrested, Tommy came to live with me in my new apartment near Safe Harbor. It wasn't the life either of us had planned, but it was built on truth and love instead of lies and greed. Tommy struggled with the trauma of what his parents had done, and we both attended counseling to help us process the betrayal and loss we'd experienced. Some days were harder than others, especially when Tommy would ask questions about why his parents had chosen money over family, or when he worried that other people might try to hurt me. But there were also moments of joy and healing. Tommy helped me decorate our new home with the few belongings I'd been able to recover. We started new traditions like Saturday morning pancakes and Sunday afternoon walks in the park. We talked openly about Harold, about family history, and about the difference between right and wrong. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I hope you'll take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Sharing these difficult truths helps other families recognize dangerous situations before it's too late. 1 year after the arrests, Tommy and I were settling into our new life together when he asked me a question that broke my heart and filled it with hope at the same time. "Grandma, do you think Mom and Dad will ever be sorry for what they did? Do you think they'll ever understand why it was wrong?" I thought about Sarah sitting in prison, probably still angry at me for stopping their plan instead of being grateful that I'd prevented them from becoming murderers. I thought about Mike, who had never shown much emotion about anything, facing years behind bars for his greed. I thought about David, who had sold his relationship with his mother for $100,000 that he would never receive. I hope they will, Tommy. People sometimes do terrible things when they let money become more important than love and family. Maybe someday they'll realize that what they planned to do was wrong, and maybe they'll be truly sorry. But even if they never understand, we can't let their choices control our lives. I'm glad you stopped them, Grandma. I'm glad we're together, and I'm glad we know the difference between right and wrong. Tommy was 11 now, growing into a thoughtful, compassionate young man who had learned lessons about integrity and courage that most adults never master. The trauma of what his parents had done would always be part of his story, but it hadn't broken him. If anything, it had made him stronger and wiser than most children his age. As I watched him work on his homework at our kitchen table, I thought about the choices that had led us to this moment. Sarah, Mike, and David had chosen greed over love, deception over honesty, and criminal conspiracy over family loyalty. Those choices had destroyed their lives and torn apart our family. But Tommy and I had also made choices. We'd chosen truth over comfort, courage over compliance, and justice over keeping family secrets. Those choices had been painful and costly, but they'd also saved our lives and preserved our integrity. I still miss the daughter I thought Sarah was, the woman I'd raised and loved and trusted with everything I had. I still grieve for the relationship with David that was lost when I discovered his involvement in the conspiracy. I still feel sad about the family gatherings we'll never have, the holidays we'll never share, the grandparent moments I'll never experience with any children Sarah might have had in the future. But I don't regret the choice I made to fight back. I don't regret exposing their criminal conspiracy, even though it meant sending my own children to prison. I don't regret protecting Tommy from parents who were willing to traumatize him to further their own criminal goals. Sometimes people ask me if I would do anything differently if I could go back and change what happened. The only thing I would change is that I would have recognized the warning signs sooner. I would have trusted my instincts when small things didn't seem right. I would have asked harder questions about the documents I was signing and the medical evaluations I was undergoing. But most importantly, I would want other families to learn from my experience. Elder abuse doesn't always look like physical violence or obvious neglect. Sometimes it looks like caring children who are very interested in their parents' belongings. Sometimes it looks like helpful sons-in-law who want to manage your financial affairs. Sometimes it looks like trusted doctors who are willing to falsify records for money. The warning signs are there if you know how to look for them. Sudden interest in your possessions and their value. Pressure to sign documents or make financial changes. Isolation from friends and other family members who might ask uncomfortable questions. Medical professionals who seem more interested in your mental competence than your physical health. Family members who discuss your future living arrangements without including you in the conversation. If you're an elderly person who feels like something isn't quite right in your family relationships, trust your instincts. If you're a younger person who suspects that elderly relatives are being exploited, don't ignore the warning signs because it seems impossible that family members could be involved. And if you're someone who has been thinking about taking advantage of elderly family members, remember that the consequences go far beyond criminal charges and prison sentences. You're destroying relationships that can never be repaired. You're traumatizing innocent children who will carry the burden of your choices for the rest of their lives. You're betraying people who loved and trusted you, people who sacrificed to give you opportunities and advantages in life. Tommy and I survived our experience, but many elderly people don't. Many families are destroyed by greed and criminal conspiracy. Many children grow up traumatized by parents who chose money over morality. The choice is always there: love or greed, honesty or deception, family loyalty or personal profit. Sarah, Mike, and David made their choice and they're living with the consequences in prison cells. Tommy and I made our choice and we're living with the consequences in a small apartment filled with love, honesty, and hope for the future. I'm 74 years old now and Tommy is my world. We've built a life based on truth and mutual respect, and every day I'm grateful that we found the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it cost us everything we thought we knew about family. That's the most important lesson I can share with you today. Sometimes protecting the people you love means making choices that seem impossible, but courage and truth will always triumph over greed and deception in the end. Sometimes the smallest voices, like an 8-year-old boy who refused to let his parents hurt his grandmother, are the ones that change everything. Thank you for listening to my story, and please remember to subscribe and share this video with anyone who might need to hear it. Families everywhere need to recognize these warning signs before it's too late, and stories like mine can help prevent other tragedies from happening. Love your family but trust your instincts. And never be afraid to fight for what's right, even when the people you're fighting against are the ones you love most.